Welcome to the adventures of self. Conversations with ordinary and extraordinary people as they explore what it means to be self-expressed. Come on in. Join the adventure. So, welcome Alison Pilling to the Adventures of Self.
It's exciting to be here.
This is an unusual setting because I have the opportunity to do this live. So probably people who are listening don't have that sense, but we are recording from a kitchen in Corfu, where Alice and I have been living as sort of housemates for the last few weeks, and really want to take the time to talk about let's talk about sex.
Do we have to? Yeah, it's really tricky business, isn't it, talking about sex?
Yeah, it's something that it's like just saying the word. Like I immediately started nervously laughing, and there's this thought of maybe I need to make a joke of it to try to dismiss my own issues, questions, nervousness, and that's okay, right? We want to have an open discussion about sexuality, eroticism, and how I think we relate to that in the modern world.
I used to be the same. I think there was this sense of sex being something that we just don't know about, and we can feel quite alone in. Is it just me? Is there more than I've experienced? Is this it? What else is there? Am I supposed to like this? Or how do I get? How does it work? Why are relationships so confusing? I don't think any of us are alone in that bewilderment around sexuality. And 10 years ago, I was exactly the same. A repressed Catholic upbringing. And as I was coming up to 50, I was just I want to know more about this. And I saw an advert for tantra that then scared me, and I just tried to ignore it for a year. But it wouldn't leave me. And I've always been interested in personal development anyway. And there are some things that you see and you just think, I'm not going to do that. And some things that you see and go, oh no, and you have to do them. And sexuality was mine.
The thing that you just brought in that, it's like the elephant in the room, right? Because obviously we are all here because of sexuality, right? We wouldn't be alive if our respective parents hadn't had sexual relations. And so there's a biological sort of innate thing that for the species to continue, we have this urge or calling, and then there's thousands of years of culture and society that put different understandings of what that means for men, what that means for women, what that means in one country or culture, civilization, as opposed to another at a particular time. And all that's kind of wrapping around, and then we're, so I think people obviously are well aware, right? I mean, sexuality pervades, commercials and our culture and rock music and everything, that we're kind of left in this sense of fuck, I don't know, and it seems like everybody else out there has a clue as to what's going on, and I'm not in on this.
Yeah, that feeling, because the thing that I've learned over the years of exploring all of this in all the ways I've explored it, it's not about sex, it's about that PIV conveyor belt to orgasm of, that the way that we think it's supposed to be, like in the movies, of that simultaneous orgasm driven. And actually what I've discovered is that our sexuality or eroticism is much more personal, that we need to find our individuality in it, because we're not going to fit that conveyor. Well, some people, some people, great, if you fit that conveyor belt and you have those golden moments. One of the things that I loved reading about when I trained as a sexological body worker, which we'll probably come to in a bit, is about sexual potential. And this question of who are the blessed few who actually understand and fulfill sexual potential, for whom it's easy. And I meet loads of people who are that I've journeyed with or I'm in sex positive groups with now, but no, we're all there because it was a mystery and a confusion and something that each of us found really hard to understand in our lives. And for some reason, whether we're wounded healers or adventurers, we've gone into in more depth about what that connection and what our personal eroticism. And one of my teachers talks about exploring sexuality and as a route to personal and erotic freedom. Freedom from ourselves and freedom to make choices in whatever situation we're in. And that phrase has stayed with me ever since I first heard it, about what's personal and erotic freedom.
Yeah, one of the things that you just were speaking about that really came up for me, when you speak about sexological body work and being as a profession, right, being a counselor or working with other people, and sex positive groups, I think from the outside, I think maybe first inclination I might have is there's this idea, it's like, wow, these people are really liberated or really free, or kind of at this other level of understanding. But what you spoke to was that a lot of that comes from trying to understand, right? That there's a lot of confusion, and just being open about that. It's not to say, well, I'm the number one lover, or I know exactly how to please myself and 99 other people at a time, or whatever it is. That a lot of that, it's like, as you say, there's the adventure side, and then there's the wounded healer side of somebody who's gone through a particular journey for himself or herself, and then, like many people in personal development, thinks, oh, well, I would like to help other people who have maybe similar or very, very different concerns, problems, and that, like, there's that side of just kind of opening up, that it's not all about, like, I don't get the impression it's all about, just kind of like these monumental orgasmic moments at every day, right? It's about understanding and getting to that place of freedom and what that means for you individually.
And then, where are you in the presence of another? How do you make not exactly agreements, because that sounds like too, people love to think that sex is all magic, but actually, if you rely on magic and telepathy, you can make a lot of mistakes. And learning to communicate about what feels nice for us, because often we're very focused on someone else. So my particular, one of the many things that have helped is understanding my body and what feels nice on my skin, or energetically how close I want people to be with me, or where I want to be touched and how I want to touch someone else. I mean, that was an amazing thing as a woman, to learn to initiate from a sense of feeling what I wanted, instead of being expected to like something that someone else knew how to do, which I think that's for everybody. And I don't want to generalize about men or women in this, because I think as human beings, it's a very confusing topic about who we want to be close to, who we want to keep away. And when I've joined all the trainings I've done, people come to join them with all these different paths. Some people have got into it because they've had difficult experiences in childhood. There's been just let me pause for a second. I joined because I wanted to know what else was possible. I wanted to know what if I was going to have greater relationships and better experiences. I didn't know what was possible, and that's why I joined. But other people have come from different backgrounds, you know, from joining women's circles, or because of erotic problems in the past, or tricky relationships. No one's come fully formed and gone, hey, I'm a sex god or a goddess, you know. And that idea that I'd love to talk about the 3 erotic realms at some point, but that sense of what our sexual style is, you know, I didn't know anything about that. And now I just go, oh, wow. You know, there's some people who are interested in what we call partner engagement, where we're wanting to look, you know, where we're, and that's what the whole thing is directed to, about how I relate to you and can I turn you on. But other people are more interested in play and role play and kink and that kind of stuff, and that's more their natural style. And then other people can be more trance states, that it's their inner experience during intimacy.
So these are the 3.
Those are the 3 erotic realms.
Cool. Well,
yeah.
now that you've introduced them, let's get into them a little bit more. So partner engagement, play, and trance, ecstatic experience. Yeah.
Okay, so I would say, that comes from that idea of sexual potential. So if we want to have good sexual experiences in our lives, if we can move between these 3 realms, we can have both variety, novelty, depth, relationship. And it comes from a piece of research by somebody called Daniel Mosher. And he interviewed, I don't know how many people, and asked people what their how they did sex, I guess. And so the way that we often see it, and it's portrayed in the media and what we know about, is how we relate to someone else. What's relationship like, and what's sexuality and relationship, whether it's a hookup or some deep tantric divine union. And so if we don't fit that model of I'm interested in you, you're interested in me, how do we relate to each other, we can feel like, oh my God, am I weird, or am I broken? So through Tantra, I got to explore that kind of who am I in the presence of somebody else. The Tantra, you know, I was with a Tantra school for about 3 or 4 years, doing different exercises and different things to learn about body and connection and spirit. And I think that's a very beautiful way of how I learned to relate differently to other women who I never used to, you know, I never really understood sisterhood. My main focus was with men, but then to relate to men differently as well. When I trained as a sexological body worker, that's a way of understanding your own body with someone else helping you. The focus is not on the relationship with you and the sexological body worker. The focus is on what can you notice in your own body. Can you understand the mindfulness of sexuality, if you like, and can you allow yourself to go into a deeper trance state where you can have revelations through kind of rhythmic movement, but you're aware of your partner, but you're allowed to go more into your own inner experience.
And with that, I mean, because I think there's, you know, immediately questions come up, like, you know, how, I mean, I guess it's true for anybody who works with energy and in healing, right? You have to make a distinction, because you're a facilitator. You're facilitating somebody else's experience. And you know, I think for many of us, right, it's sort of unusual. It's like, oh wow, you can do that with sex and sexual energy, as well as with psychology or Reiki, or you know, whatever it is, because you've got to. I mean, and I think the the client or the whatever the term is for the person receiving, it has to, like, you've got to be very aware of those lines, right? It's like, well, because you're providing an opportunity for that person's learning experience, awarenesses about his or her sexuality, physically, emotionally, psychologically, aurically, I mean, in all sorts of ways, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, how many times do we get to explore sexuality where it's not dependent on someone else having a good time or having an awful time? You know, this idea that you can work with someone to, I mean, that's where I first learned about the wheel of consent in sexological body work, where this body is mine and I'm responsible for all the things in it, my emotion, my health, my pleasure, and that's your body over there, and you're responsible for all the things in your domain, in your body, your rights to pleasure and health and steadiness, and if this thing that we have that it's like, oh, I can just touch you randomly. Well, no, we can't, because I'm responsible. So then how do I work out what I want to invite people into my domain and how to touch me? And then you also get to work out what a sexological body work is. It's never about them, it's about the client. But understanding that you're responsible for your body and your pleasure, and if you want to touch somebody else's body, and you know, let's talk about how and what would that feel like. And it's so liberating when you undo ideas about giving and receiving that are a bit old school in a way, that doing equals I'm giving. Because we ask questions like, well, who's this for? Is this for me or for you? And did I ask for it? In which case it's for me. Or did you ask for it? In which case, what is it? How can I help you? And it can sound a bit clinical, and it absolutely isn't, because magic can come when everybody feels free to say no to what they don't want to experience and yes, and begin to learn what you have a yes to. And I swear that learning the wheel of consent has just changed the way I go through life.
Yeah, you walked me through this a few days ago, because I had this, you know, like when you first mentioned it to me, you were saying, oh, wheel of consent, and it was just sort of this phrase that I heard, and I kind of imagined it as if, I have to say, as if it's like a wheel on like a rotor or something that you spin, that has like all these different things, and it's like, you know, like option one, or, you know, like this is going to happen, that's going to happen, and where it lands, like, okay, well, do you consent to this or not? Which is not what this is about, and not that we have to go through and do everything, because I think that would be too much, but I think there is this interesting thing. It's like there is this idea of there are different quadrants around a wheel, that, as you say, like there's, you know, half of it's about who's it for, half of it's about who, you know, is it for you, is it for me? What I thought was really interesting, is we were talking about this in the last couple of days, the difference between willingness and wanting something, which is like is quite a useful distinction that, you know, we can bring into what's happening or what's being asked for.
Yeah, it's brilliant, willingness and wantingness, because there are sometimes, I don't know whether you've ever had this, where you're in the middle of something and you think, am I supposed to like this? And actually I don't, but the other person really wants you to like it.
Yes.
I think we've probably all been there. And so when you understand that at that point you can change your mind or say, actually, can we do something different now? And for me, and I guess for lots of people, understanding what's worth wanting in any given moment, rather than hoping we like what happens to us, that is major. Because often, you know, if you're in a situation with someone who's kind enough to say, so what do you like then? You know, do we know? And actually, do we have to be sexual, or can we just say, actually, I'd just like you to put your hand on the back of my heart now? Or can I just see what it's like to sit next to you and have our knees touching? Because a lot of sex is focused on genitals and orgasm. actually what I learned is how much the skin can take in this sense of sensual pleasure rather than sexual touch, which can put people on high alert and move everybody into performance. Why am I not coming? Oh my God, I don't want to come too fast, you know, or is this taking too long, or does the other person like it? I'm too fat, I'm too thin, I'm not enjoying this, you know. So we're in our heads instead of the two questions that my teacher Betty Martin talks about. The only things are, am I enjoying this, and what would make it nicer?
Interesting.
Am I enjoying this, and what would make it nicer? And then do we have the courage and the vocabulary to adjust, to make little requests like, could you just slow down to 100%? Could you just touch me a bit more softly? So there are these two questions, will you and may I? So if I want to touch you, I go, oh, may I touch your beard? Or, you know, this idea that I remember the first time I heard somebody I was in a cuddle party for the first time, and I was really nervous. And somebody who I was training sexological bodywork with leaned over and said, Alison, may I nibble your ear? No one had ever asked me that before. And I had time to think about, did I want to do it? Or did I want him to nibble my ear or not? Or was I just happy, you know, with we were just next to each other. And then I just thought, well, I want to see what that feels like. And so I could say yes. But that being asked from somebody who was very confident in their sexuality already, just being asked made this huge difference, because I could feel into whether I wanted it. I could notice whether I felt that, or I could have said no anytime. And then trusting myself that I'd make the right decision, you know, because there are times when I've made lots of mistakes. But this sense of someone saying, may I?
And what's interesting, like coming up for me, right, I was having questions as you were speaking, thinking, is this predominantly, because you said, well, you don't want to speak about men and women because it's true for everybody, and there was a sense of me thinking, is what you're talking about, because I think a lot of consent comes up around women feel obligated or they feel pressured, and there's, you know, a lot of stuff that's been around that over the last few years, and I think there is a, you know, so I was saying, right, that there is this assumption that things around consent and questions and that is, there's a part of me that feels like, oh, that's more for women. But when you're speaking about that sort of may I, will I, what I noticed in myself was there was a sense of, oh, that's quite exciting, right? Because, I find myself, you know, yes, you try to have open communication, but things do get silenced in sexual acts sometimes. Not that you're not making, you know, expression, but you're not sort of saying, checking in at every moment, and I don't know that you need to be doing that. But there is this sense, like when you're saying, oh, well, may I, will you, it creates a very different dynamic, because, you know, if somebody asks me, may I do this to you, there's all of a sudden, like, I can feel the sense like, oh, well, here's something that might be quite exciting for my partner that I hadn't thought of, and well, maybe I like it, maybe I don't, but I might be willing to try that, right? And similarly, if I ask something, rather than assuming something, if I ask, will you, you know, do this, will you know, whatever it is, and the person says yes, then it's like, wow, okay, now there's like, well, there's real agreement, and now we're, you know, we're on this together, where, as you say, sometimes I mean, there are definitely times I can think of where there's been mutual you know, ecstasy and experience, and I'm sure there's also been times where I thought, this is great, and the other person's thinking, not quite sure about this.
Yeah, I've had those too.
Yeah. Anyway, that's just what's coming up for me in that.
Yes, and also I'm not the, you know, the moral police. We talk about enthusiastic and embodied consent. So do you have that vocalized yes? Does your body feel yes? And is that communicated. And so, and what it means is that we can just get off that conveyor belt of, because I think what happens is when everybody's in high performance, of like, I should be feeling this, I should be more turned on, or does she like this, and does he expect some performance blowjob? You know, we all get we can get anxious. I'm not saying we all, because some people are not like that, but you know, there can be this real anxiety and we're in our heads. Whereas actually when we can go, oh, this feels nice, and the next thing I want to do is, I don't know, kiss the back of your calf, or, you know, like we can just look at someone else's body and then go, oh, I really would like to kiss your tummy, you know, and then the other person gets chance to go, no, I don't feel like that. But that doesn't mean no ever. But it's just this, you know, when I talk about erotic and personal freedom, I think it can just be quite relaxing, especially, I mean, you talked about your experience as a man, but when you know that what you'd like to do is really welcome and someone else is curious about what might happen, because men can get into, like, they think they have to give all the time, whereas actually what's really, none of us are very good about saying what we want initially, but if you're in that old school kind of giving, which means I have to pretend it's for you, but actually this is what I wanted to do all along. Instead of saying, would you like a massage? It's like, I'd really like to touch your body. Would a massage be good, or can I just come and squeeze your bum? Then you can just get really free about it, knowing that if you ask and someone says no, you're not going to throw yourself off a tall building. You're just going to go, oh, they're in the middle of something, and, you know, disguising what I want to do is go down on somebody, but I'm going to offer a massage first.
Yeah, I think that's really useful, because we spoke about this before. It's like, yeah, we can think it's like, well, I'm doing something for somebody, but really, if I say, well, can I give you a massage, right? And it sounds like, oh, I'm being so, giving and caring, but really, yeah, I have an agenda to it. I mean, it can be a loving agenda, but as you say, it's like, maybe I want to go down on somebody, or I really, I want to have sex, but I know I've got to start with a massage to get there. And, but if you say, well, can you give me a massage, and maybe let's see where it goes, or I want to do this, there is, then there's agency, and there's that, as you say, the wheel of consent, right? You're somewhere in there. The one thing I wanted to bring up, because it comes up for me, is because you mentioned it can get clinical, and there's this question in my mind, how micromanaged does this become? Because you can get into this, like, well, I'm going to do this, now I'm going to thrust like this, now I'm going to touch here, now I'm going to kiss there, and it sort of feels like you can almost end up every millisecond asking a question, which kind of takes out the magic potential of it. So where is the kind of mix of, we're in the flow of something and we want to have consent and awareness about what's meaningful and pleasurable for ourselves and for the other person?
That's a brilliant question. It's a brilliant question. With the wheel of consent, in the 4 quadrants, there's giving and receiving, or serving and allowing. That would be what we think of when I ask you, hey Taylor, would you give me a massage? And then, so it's for me because I've asked for it and you do it. The other one is taking and allowing, which is, hey Taylor, can I touch your body? And you go, oh, okay then, I'm not sure about that. And that's taking and allowing. So you let me touch you for my pleasure. And this is the gold of the wheel of consent. And when you've got 2 people who know how to take, some of my best pleasurable experiences are when I've been able to say to someone, I understand that you can say no to any of my requests, so that's really fine. But when 2 people know how to say no, you can really relax into, I'm touching you because I want to feel you, and I'm allowing myself to be touched, and it feels nice knowing that if anything speeds up too fast or goes in a way that I don't want, I could just move your hand. And so eventually, once you get the basics of that done, about what Betty Martin says is the best sex is when you've got two people who know how to take. And, you know, taking can sound really selfish, but all it means is, her version of taking is that you can feel the sensations in your own body through direct pleasure, not the indirect pleasure of seeing someone else having a nice time, which is, you know, generous and quite good for one's ego to see, you know, a bit like seeing a kid scoring a goal on a football field. You know, that's fantastic. You're really happy, but actually your body's freezing on the sidelines in February. So someone else having an orgasm can make you feel like a great lover, but actually can you also understand what's nice for you in direct pleasure rather than the indirect pleasure of getting off on giving, for example.
And what comes to me through that is that it's a journey, right? So there is this kind of, like, we're doing something and then we have a conversation and it's like, okay, we fix that. But there's this, because what you're saying is, like, you know, particularly for two people, and I guess it can happen in multiple relationships or an individual relationship, but you're learning more how to ask the questions and how to respond to what it is you truly want.
And to what the other person truly wants. So that there's an honesty and a willingness to be curious, to not get too attached to anything, to not do that kind of conquesting thing that we can do, like, you know, if I do A, then I'll get to B and then I'll get to C. And, you know, but just like, can we really appreciate and be present with what we're feeling? You know, if someone's kind enough to let us touch their body, instead of trying to, you know, get all over it, can we actually feel like, may I touch your arm in the here?
Yeah.
You know, like if I just do this and I put my hand on you, instead of trying to get somewhere, can I really feel through my hand whether I'm enjoying this, and what does your skin feel like? And you're just being there letting me have my experience about whether this feels nice, but I'm not going to rush you into anything or do this as an excuse to get somewhere else. And it sounds, I can only say how much being able to focus on what's happening, the sensations in my body in the presence of someone else takes a lot of pressure off. And I don't expect anyone to, like, only do what I want. That's not at all. It's like, how can we be generous and stay connected with each other rather than jump on some conditioning conveyor belt? Because then once we get off that conveyor belt, there's just so much novelty and variety. You know, I've done some amazing things playing the 3-minute game with people that you know, when you talked about something earlier, you know, you can have that idea. One of the greatest games that I've ever enjoyed on a Saturday night is when you get a bowl and you put some ideas in, like have a shower together, have a bath together, cover you in rose petals, get some hot oil, do a massage, feed me chocolate. You know, you put all these suggestions in the bowl. And then later on, when you get together, you can take them out and lift them, you know, lift them out and you go, yes, no, maybe. And then set a timer. So you're just doing anything for 3 minutes or 15 minutes.
Right.
But you just, and then when the timer goes off, you pause and say thank you. And then you pick something else up and go, yes, no, maybe. Oh my God, that game is just one of my favourite ways to explore all the things that could be intimate rather than what we call PIV sex, penis and vagina sex, penis and vulva sex. And then you get this chance to pause, to rest, to be creative, to really be seen. I mean, it might be just like, for 3 minutes, will you just look into my eyes? Or for 3 minutes, you ask me what you want in that moment. But because it's 3 minutes, you don't get stuck in anything, you don't get on some journey that's always ending one way. And it's just a lovely, you know, back to the erotic and personal freedom. And then, of course, at some point, the timer can get thrown aside.
I was just thinking that, like,
Yeah.
you're at 3 minutes and you're like, I'm kind of enjoying this.
Yeah,
and,
I know.
and if the other person, you're like, no, we're done. It's like, wow, okay, fine. I mean, there is some sort of, excitement, I guess, to that, because you push something to a particular limit, and you're like, okay, now we've agreed, this is the time to stop. But it does get to, I just want to maybe switch up, because you were talking about, like, this idea of novelty, right? Mm-hmm. And doing things that are, sort of, I mean, because you said, like, having a bath together, having a shower together, I mean, they're beautiful things, right? But you can also have quite salacious requests in there, like, can I whip you for 3 minutes, or whatever it is, or can you whip me for, whatever it is. Because, I want to bring in because you were speaking about it before we got started, this idea of kink, conscious kink, and particularly what that can do for, because I think I have an understanding of kink, that there's a time when I feel like, I think kink for me sometimes can feel like an indulgence, or something quite taboo that, like, ooh, I've gotten away with because it's behind closed doors, but I wouldn't really come out and be sharing this. And what you were talking about before is this concept of shadow healing, which is new to me, so I'm quite curious to hear more about this.
Okay. So, I don't know about you, but I would say one or two of us have had, I can only speak for myself, like one of those really bad relationships that kind of turns you over. And you realise that you've gone to a place that you don't understand why. And it can be, so my experiences with conscious kink, BDSM can be terrifying, or people can think 50 Shades of Grey, whatever. There's a way of using those things to heal old hurts, old childhood wounds. And I had a relationship a few years ago that I don't want to talk too much about, but in order to sort out myself and what happened in that and how I got myself into a crisis point in my life, I realised I needed to go and look into, because I had, when I talked about the 3 erotic realms before, one of them is play. And that could be seen as role play, archetypes, healing, looking at where power dynamics play out, looking at dominance and submission, looking at what all that stuff can do and why it can be such a powerful force in our lives. And I was scared of it, but I did have an ex who was really into it, and he brought someone else into our relationship against my will, and they had a dominant submissive relationship that I was on the sidelines left reeling of, because I just didn't understand anything about it. And when that period of my life ended, I just thought, okay, what just happened there? What went on? And so I went on a few kink courses. Shawnee Love's one of the best teachers for this, but just to look at what came out from my childhood that was about betrayal. When I was younger, one of my parents was having an affair for 10 years, and it turned out that sort of sense of betrayal, it was in my body, it was in my system. I fainted during a session that I'd had with my boyfriend where we were roped together. Someone was trying to help us, and it brought up this hidden trauma that I hadn't actually known was inside me. And at the time, none of us recognized it for what it was, but it was about someone else coming in, and my body was in danger, and I took myself out. My unconscious felt the threat. So trauma that was the trigger, but I thought it was the trauma, but it was old since I was about 11 of someone coming into my family, and I just saw it, and in that moment it's like, I'm under threat here. But it took me a few years after that to unravel it, but I went on quite a few kink courses to do that. And so exploring things like power, where it turned out that I'm not, my ex wanted a submissive. Actually, it turns out I'm more dominant. And how did I find that out? Well, by doing exercises about power, about who's in charge here, can I get you to do stuff I want? But it's all done in a very clean, energetic way, consent always being there. There's a fantastic book called The Erotic Mind where Jack Morin talks about the emotional aphrodisiacs of fear, guilt and anger. And we often think of aphrodisiacs as good things, but these emotions are here with us. And so how are they playing out in our lives? And so I didn't understand this like dominance and submission thing, because I'm not a very submissive woman, but oh my God, I did a role play where someone was a priest for me. I don't think I've ever gone from 0 to hot in as fast time. And I started doing a little confession with someone saying, "Forgive me, Father, because I have sinned." And the guy who was role-playing the priest saying, "Yes, my child, tell me about." And it's like, oh, well, up against my friend's boyfriend asked me, and I just felt this teenage guilt coming on me, but it changed into something really powerful and a real turn on really quickly about, and I was slightly embarrassed for but it turned out that guilt was my emotional aphrodisiac, not someone being angry with me or punishing me. For that, it just made me go, oh, who the fuck do you think you are? But clicking into guilt rather than punishment, being a sinner rather than someone who was wrong. It has a very distinct
and then what
quality.
And then what do you, because the healing side of it, I mean, because there's a shadow there. Right, and I think what I get is, in a sense of, it goes to a lot of our sexuality, we indulge in something which can be fine, but if it's indulging for the sake of indulging and you're kind of repeating rather than, where does the healing come in, and what are you doing with that shadow to, because you identify that sort of aphrodisiac of guilt. And then what?
Then what? Okay, great question. What happens is that we move from compulsion to choice. So I'm really very interested in people who have fetishes and why they come up. So you can use them to understand so much about what happened in your past and how we move it. So it's from compulsion to becoming a choice. It's like, do you want just that one thing, or are there a variety of things? So they've all got transformative qualities. So anger, you can transform into passion. Fear, you can transform into courage. And guilt, you can transform into naughtiness. And so in a way, that naughtiness of breaking taboos, taking risks, because so much of life is concerned with safety now. But actually for me, taking small risks has been very liberating, because I've been such a good girl, and actually to be something that I think is naughty, which other people would just think of as just being a bit normal, who says what normal is in sex? Who gets to define that? But for me, because of my Catholic upbringing, of course, sex was full of guilt. Yeah. So for me to be able to transform it in that moment of going, oh my God, nothing really bad happened, but I didn't really have any permission for pleasure. I didn't really understand.
Talking about the healing of, the aphrodisiac and healing aspects of these things, anger, fear, guilt, and how to, what we can actually do with those consciously.
We're all running certain grooves, and when I talked about our sexuality being very individual, well, that's a combination of all the things that have happened to us and our earlier influences that will affect our preferences and tastes, and sometimes we can get into a real groove and stuck in some kind of trauma pattern. And this podcast is about adventures, and of course taking a sexuality journey is an adventure in understanding yourself on a really deep level. I mean, it's not for the faint-hearted. you know, because it's just like this thing of admitting we don't know and admitting we want to change. I mean, often people want other people to change, but we don't want to change ourselves in this, because it's quite a scary topic, going exploring your sexuality as opposed to, you know, having a relationship with someone else and then it all coming up anyway. But I remember somebody saying to me, you know, our sexuality is like a spaceship traversing galaxies, and we're often just using it to go down the corner shop to buy a white sliced loaf. And so with this idea of how we can use our sexuality to understand ourselves better, understand our real strengths, understand where we're really limited, where we're controlling, where we're frightened. But, you know, I had to do some amazing things on, you know, hardly any of my journeys involve penetrative sex, actually, but it's been more about putting myself in situations where I had to get to know myself better in anything, you know. On my women's tantra course, some of the time we had to do dancing and stripping, you know, to an audience, so that we could learn about creativity, spontaneity, voyeurism and exhibitionism. I don't think I've ever been so heart-racingly terrified, and I got up and did it. And it was exhilarating, you know. So I think this fearful aspect that can go hand in hand with sexuality, to be able to take these places of risks around vulnerability and being seen and admitting what we don't know, and using those things for connection with each other, and using eros as a life force rather than something that's just about this conveyor belt to orgasm. It's an incredible gift in our lives that not everybody will feel the need to take, but I think without this sense of exploration, of freedom, you know, in the end it took in lots of other things like the Enneagram, and then deciding, you know, now to go and follow my free spirit. I wouldn't have been able to do any of that if I didn't have that return to steadiness in me, that the difficult relationship, you know, I was at a point in my life where I just was in anxiety, and I had to find trust in myself again. And that was the biggest, that was a very humbling time of my life, really, of feeling like relationship should be this way, i.e. Alison's way, and then realising that the world doesn't work like that. We don't always get what we want, and we're not going to, you know, we're not going to be destroyed by that, but we can grow from it.
Well, I mean, you mentioned, you know, this is, it feels very in line with the podcast, right? You mentioned the adventure side of it, and I think what we've covered feels quite adventurous, you know, but also the self side of it, because it does go to what does it mean for us individually, you know, that journey you spoke about. And, you know, like an adventure, you know, it's not a bit like the spaceship, right? It's not an errand journey, like, oh, I've got to go from here down to the corner shop, and there's only, well, there's the efficient way, or I can go the long way to get there, right? It's more like, well, I'm going out exploring, right? Whether that's my neighborhood or, you know, my sexuality or whatever, and then I don't know exactly where I'm going to end up, right? That's the adventure side, because we don't know where we're going to go. We may have something in mind, but that evolves, that changes, because there's self-discovery along the way, right? And so as we discover things, then we have a new understanding of ourselves, of our surroundings, of what it is we may want from something. And so all of that's unfolding because we're taking sort of, you know, and an adventure, right? You know, we can get caught up thinking like, wow, adventure, that sounds really racy and you know, impossible in a sense, but everybody gets to define what an adventure is for them. So how much of that discovery, how much of that expression, I think what's interesting is like saying, well, but this is available. It's available for you, for me, for anybody. And there are all these opportunities, classes, books, learning that's coming that make it a much safer and guided journey and adventure than was 5, 10, 100 years ago.
Yes, and the thing that I've done most recently, since lots of things went online, I held with a poet in Berlin, we held a sensual salon that was mostly about just letting people meet, and we'd give them her erotic poetry, or we'd give people authentic questions to go in and discuss in breakout rooms, like of their peak experiences or times they'd felt vulnerable, or times they felt really connected, or our last one was about the erotic realms, about where do we know. And what I'm very interested in is connection fundamentally, and what we are willing to see in ourselves and what we can hold seeing someone else without rushing to judge or taking it personally. And because intimacy's not, there's no guarantees in relationship. You can't be safe in love. But I thought I could be, and I thought relationship just looked like this, that is kind of this happy and wonderful for who has that. But sometimes I can think that models of great relationship can be in short supply. I
think in particular models of authentic great relationships, because we're shown this fantastical happily ever after. Well, the picture ends and they're dancing on a hilltop, but it's like, well, what happens the next day and the next day and all that, right? Because there is it goes to the consent and the dialogue part of that and the discovery.
Yes, and how, there's love and desire, and love comes with closeness, and desire comes with separateness. So how do we keep love and desire both alive in long-term relationships? And how do we not allow settled love to kill desire, because then that will, lead to restrictions? But how can we have that sense of aliveness in ourselves ongoing, where we can also be relaxed and excited, free and loved, safe in ourselves and secure in the presence of another? And that takes a lot of self-awareness and a lot of great communication, because if sex is reduced to positions and porn and not that I'm particularly judgmental about those, because what works for you works for you. What I'm more interested in is the possibilities for connection and intimacy, whether you're polyamorous or monogamous or celibate. It doesn't really, we can move around all of those places in our time, but whatever relationship structure we're in at any given moment, can we really be ourselves? Can we really be free to be ourselves? What are we withholding? What are we resentful about? And can we use, this idea of like playing with power? You can think, oh my God, it's terrifying. But if someone does something to piss you off, can you go, okay, I'm just going to give you a little smack on the bum now, and make light of it, so that we can not hold on to our grudges and or we can make up through intimacy, and intimacy can be a really part of something that's satisfying for ourselves and really contribute to our lives as well, where we're not feeling in, I can go to be in a state of longing, but in fact, how can we just create something in any given moment, rather than thinking that there's some big tantric rule book in the sky and we don't know what it is. You know.
And I mean, what I hear you speaking about, like, gets to this idea that, you know, particularly, you know, talking about, it's like, well, you can be in a monogamous relationship, you can be polyamorous, you can be celibate, that, right, sexuality becomes more about the energy, that the potential that's there in all of us. And, you know, it goes back to what we said at the beginning, right? It's like, well, whether we choose to procreate, there is this kind of encoded sense about, and that's an energy, like, I mean, you know, the fact that the species has to further itself, right? There is this kind of thing, so that, to me, there's an energetic potential. Whether what you choose to do with that is up to you. And it goes to, you know, it's like we were speaking before, like this, there's a creativity in that, right? That, because, you know, we you know, you gather up a lump of clay, and you either leave it as a lump of clay, you make a bowl, you make a dish, you make a sculpture, and the same with, you know, our sexual energy. You can choose to say, I'm going to be with this person, and we are going to, as long as we are in agreement, be in a meaningful monogamous relationship. Or you say, no, I'm going to keep all my sexual energy for myself, I'm going to be celibate, I'm going to whatever, express that in my art, in my love for humanity, whatever it is. So there's all these different ways to play with that. And what I get is that discovery part is like getting into the juice of what's there, and then having a sense, okay, well, what do you choose to do with that? How do you choose to start to express that, to use that, to move with that?
Absolutely. I mean, that time, you know, I don't have kids, but really that time of procreation is a very small period of our lives, you know, and so we've still got this desire, we've still got this power, we've still, and sometimes we have a quiet time, you know, where actually we can't be bothered with someone else, and we can problematize that and say, oh, I've got no libido. But actually, what if that felt like peace after a lifetime of being on the horse about relationships? And so I think it's this understanding that, you know, for me, I started exploring my creativity before I started exploring my sexuality. I've been writing a lot in the last 2 years, and those two things now have come together. But also, when you talked about playfulness, how can we use the creativity of Eros to create meaningful, enjoyable times with our partners, or, you know, if you go to a party, like, how can we use that sense of our sexuality filtering through to other aspects of our lives? I remember one of my tantra teachers used to say, if you can sort out your sexuality, if you can sort out your sex life, you can sort out anything else. And I think that's been my experience because of what I've learned about my body, about consent, about how to use what I've known in my everyday life, about, you know, sorting out little ruptures, or thinking, well, what do I want if someone asks me, or what do I want to do with someone or to somebody? Then that comes through in the things I say no to and the things I say yes to. Can I wholeheartedly say yes to something? Where am I putting up with stuff that I should say no to? And can I be very clear in my language? I've learned all that through this exploration. I've learned about my personality and my habits and where they were serving me and how I can now transform those. But I wouldn't have got, you know, I could have just stayed stuck, dissatisfied, complaining, thinking it was someone else's fault, blaming my mother or whichever boyfriend I had at the time. But actually, in looking at this, I've had to explore every aspect of my life. And I would love to tell you that it's all been roses and divine union and the superior man, but it hasn't been like that, because I've had to look at, what did you say, the gold and the lead, you know, the shadows and the light. But I actually think, in a way, exploring my shadows has made me more honest, and more, like, I'm all right with myself now. That's fine, because I know my worst. And so there's a freedom to that.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that I think gets talked about in shadow work, you know, because bringing something up and being aware of it actually gives you freedom, but it lets you see, you know, we were talking about like the guilt aspect and where something may come from, but you then have an opportunity to start to transform that, to transmute that, and you know, that's alchemy. Then you know, a lot of personal development work in one way or another really gives that frame for people to because it you know, can feel very daunting, right? And you know, certainly we're talking about sexuality, like it feels very daunting to think about, you know, going on courses and being very vulnerable about ourselves in front of strangers, or going to do a striptease in front of, you know, a group of people, yeah, like it's not that everything has to be done, but it's like, well, what can you choose to explore? I just want to bring back in, because you spoke about eros, yeah, there's something I just want to explore around what that is, because I'm mindful, like I did kind of frame this up as this kind of like procreational energy, and I mean, obviously there is a significant portion of time, and more for men than women, but there is, yeah, this time kind of procreation ability up to whatever it is, 11, 12, 13, right? But there's a lot of sexualization. I mean, Freud made a career out of it, but there's a lot of sexual energy that's in that, and obviously, yeah, post-menopause and post-creative ability, there's still that energy. And so what is that archetype of eros that is there?
You know what? I don't know that I have an answer to that, Taylor, because I think that, you know, I think that's really where it comes back to that individuality. I mean, I can tell you from a sexological bodywork about how we can use intention, attention, breath, movement and sound, i.e. voice, to create our erotic energy. I know about that, and I know how to live, but I don't know that I have a definition of eros, other than to encourage people to go and find out how it is in them, because there's something exhilarating about taking a sexuality journey, just from stepping into something as beautiful as a women's circle or a men's circle, but that seems to me to be, I don't know, maybe it's the same as that driving force of our spirit or our soul, that can have an erotic element. I think that's a huge question, actually.
Well, and as I'm saying it, I mean, because it's an archetype, because it's a, you know.
What do you think?
Well, as I was saying it, I think that there's an aspect that, you know, we're here in Greece, right? And Eros was a Greek god, one of the oldest, actually. And you know, gods and goddesses, they were spoken of as archetypes that are that come through us, and you know, they're aspects of us that we can work with, right? So we can be over indulgent in something. So somebody could be, you know, very much in her Aphrodite, or a man could be very much in his Aries, right? These like really, you know, passionate things. But then the reason we have myths is to talk about what happens when we overindulge those, the you know, overstepping the bounds, right? When mortals try to have these, you know, godlike experiences, because they may not be tempered with something. So, you know, there may be an Athena or an Artemis energy that needs to temper a woman's Aphrodite, or a, you know, a Dionysus or Hermes that needs to temper a man's, you know, whatever. And I think that, you know, Eros is something that moves through us, and I like the idea that it's a mystery and we don't actually know, right? But it's there, it's present. So, then it's an exploration to choose how to move with that.
Yes, and how to embody those archetypes.
Mm.
You know, I think I think this idea of archetypes is really interesting, actually, and whether we use that through Greek mythology or other archetypes. You know, I've explored things like the queen archetype, or the goddess, or the slut, or the patrician, or so the exploration of archetypes, which you can do in lots of. I did it as part of the conscious kink, but it's not. You know, I've also done this beautiful tantra structure called the journey of the heart, where we go into the archetypes of the lover and the goddess and the sinner and the fool, and you can apologize to all the people you've ever hurt, and someone will apologize to you for all the people they've ever hurt. And that journey of the heart, which is exploring archetypes, it's so beautiful about how we bring in the collective into ourselves, and then see where we are with our boy, our girl, our crone. We can move through that by seeing how, in this embodied way, we're living today, and what lessons. You know, I think that fundamentally changed my relationship towards men, of seeing people in a very different way, rather than, okay, somebody wants something from me and I feel expected of just more like, oh, who's coming towards me? What am I here to create with this person? You know, I'm not looking for, something that was unconscious. You know, we're all being pulled by the strings of our past. That's true. But what we get in understanding choice rather than compulsion, and in any way you do it, because you'll be drawn to what you need to be drawn to. And even the sexuality journey isn't for everybody. But if it is something that you're curious about who you are and what might be possible, it's an amazing thing to do for self-awareness with other people holding mirrors, rather than having to get something from someone or nail something down or have certainty.
And, like any, I think, focus of personal development, I mean, you choose to what extent, right? I mean, it may be there's a weekend course, or a primer, or a questionnaire in a book, right? That can help you come to deeper understanding, and then what you choose to do with that. Absolutely.
And one of my favorite books, because understanding ourselves through our sexuality is fascinating. And there's a book called The Erotic Mind that really helped. Like, what are our habits? Where are we stuck? And where are we in a loop where we're still creating the same relationships over and over again with different people based on things that happened? God, the liberation from ourselves fundamentally and our unconscious drivers is the great freedom.
Beautiful. Well, I think ending on freedom, liberation through the erotic mind, and through opportunity of exploring the adventure of sexuality, it's a good place to end. So thank you, Alison, for coming on the show. Really appreciate your time and your expertise and the adventure we've created here today.
You're welcome.